In the summer of 2025, almost exactly a year before the 2026 World Cup opened, the warning arrived in the clearest possible form. Not a report, not a projection, not a theoretical concern raised in a federation meeting or a fan organization's letter. A visible, documented, photographable reality played out in 9 American stadiums across the opening round of the Club World Cup. 400,000 empty seats, not spread across a minor regional competition or a niche tournament with limited following. 400,000 empty seats at a competition involving some of the most famous football clubs on earth: Real Madrid, Chelsea, Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich. Clubs whose names fill stadiums on every continent. And in 9 American venues, across 16 matches, those names produced stadiums that were, on average, just over half full. Some were catastrophically worse. One match drew fewer than 3,500 supporters to a venue holding over 25,000. Another was 17% full. Another 20%. FIFA's response to those numbers was a statement expressing optimism that attendances would improve. They did for later matches. The point is not that the Club World Cup was a disaster from start to finish. The point is what those early numbers told anyone paying attention about the conditions the 2026 World Cup would face if the same pricing model, the same travel barriers, the same institutional approach to supporter access, and the same gap between promotional language and operational reality were simply carried over to the larger event. The warning was there, in the attendance data, in the photographs of empty upper tiers, in the face of every stadium worker who had prepared for a full house and looked out at rows of unused seats. FIFA did not change course. And now, 2 days before the tournament opens in Mexico City, the fan revolt that the governing body failed to take seriously enough has produced exactly the consequences that warning pointed toward. Empty seats in pre-tournament matches, hotel occupancy below forecasts across 11 American host cities, aviation bookings from Europe down year on year, more than 17,000 tickets canceled by supporters who had already purchased them and decided, after calculating the risks, that the journey wasn't worth taking. 174,000 signatures in a single petition in the Netherlands, a Facebook boycott group with over 25,000 members, a former FIFA president posting publicly that fans should stay away, and the director of a hotel in Houston who had expected to be fully booked by now and isn't. That last detail matters as much as any of the larger numbers. The director of the Lancaster Hotel in Houston told reporters directly they were expecting full occupancy, thinking they would be sold out by now. Not a projection from an economist, not a forecast from a market analyst. The person running a hotel in a World Cup host city 3 days before the tournament, saying out loud that the reality has not matched the expectation. In Seattle, the owner of a local hotel reported occupancy for June at 7% below where it was the same month last year. Last year, before the World Cup, before the supposed wave of international visitors, before the tournament that was supposed to transform the economic landscape of its host cities. So what's really happening here? And more importantly, how did we get to a moment where the world's greatest football tournament opened with a measurable, documented, multi-directional fan revolt that FIFA saw coming and chose not to address? Let's go back to where the revolt began, because it didn't start as a complaint. It started as a complaint. And the complaints were specific, reasonable, and raised through the proper channels long before anyone was posting hashtags or signing petitions. Football Supporters Europe, the umbrella body representing organized fan groups across the continent, with decades of experience advocating for supporter interests at the highest levels of the sport, raised the alarm in December, not in vague terms, with specific figures. Pay tables that had been quietly circulated to national associations showed a supporter following their team through a full World Cup campaign, from the first group match to the final via the National Federation route, would pay at least $6,900, almost 5 times the equivalent cost at the previous World Cup. The organization's executive director described the situation as stunning. He said the current approach was being driven by a handful of people trying to make as much money as possible from the tournament, and that it was putting the very nature of the competition at risk. He said the lowest price category, the $60 tickets that FIFA had cited as evidence of accessibility, would not even be made available through the National Association route. Those tickets were reserved for general sale and subjected to dynamic pricing. The loyalist supporters, following their teams through the official channels that the World Cup tradition had always relied on, were being asked to pay 5 times what they paid in Qatar. And the cheapest option wasn't available to them at all. The fan organization called the situation a monumental betrayal of World Cup tradition. It formally demanded that FIFA halt ticket sales while the pricing structure was reconsidered. FIFA did not halt ticket sales. It issued a statement. It expressed commitment to accessibility. It continued selling tickets at the prices it had set. That sequence, complaint, formal demand, non-response, continuation, repeated itself across multiple contexts and multiple months. When the Attorneys General of New York and New Jersey formally subpoenaed FIFA over its ticketing practices in late May, the governing body did not volunteer transparency. When the Attorney General of California sent a formal letter seeking information about whether seat categories had been misrepresented to buyers, FIFA did not respond publicly with specific answers. When the seat map at the stadium in New Jersey was changed after tickets had already been sold, creating new zones, reassigning supporters to less desirable locations, behind goals and far from the pitch, FIFA described its maps as indicative rather than guaranteed. That phrase, indicative rather than guaranteed, is worth sitting with. A supporter who pays $8,000 for what they believe to be a premium seat at a World Cup final does so on the basis of what they are shown at the point of purchase. If what they are shown is, in the governing body's own language, indicative rather than guaranteed, then what exactly are they buying? The answer, it turns out, is whatever FIFA decides to give them. Not what was shown, not what was implied, whatever the governing body subsequently determines is appropriate. That is not a consumer transaction. That is a relationship in which one party holds all the power and the other holds all the financial exposure.
The revolt that grew from these conditions was not at its origin about politics or ideology or any single grievance. It was about the basic experience of trying to attend a football match at a World Cup and finding the process hostile, opaque, expensive beyond reason, and ultimately untrustworthy. Alan Ross, a supporter from Scotland, described his experience of the queuing system for tickets in terms that cut through all the statistical analysis. He said it was the definition of madness. He said he was not going to chase anymore. He gave up. He had tried to engage with the official process in good faith and found a system so confusing, so unpredictable, and so exhausting that abandoning it was the rational choice. Alan Ross is not a statistic. He is a person who loves football and wanted to go to a World Cup and couldn't navigate the system built to sell him a ticket. Multiply his experience across the thousands of supporters who went through similar processes in different countries, in different languages, trying to purchase tickets for their national team's matches, and you begin to understand how the revolt from below built. It built through conversations and online groups and petitions. The Facebook group calling for a boycott of matches in the United States grew to over 25,000 members. An online petition in the Netherlands, specifically calling on the Dutch national team to withdraw, gathered 174,000 signatures. The former president of FIFA, banned from the sport since 2015, posted publicly on social media that fans who wanted to stay away were right to do so. He quoted a Swiss legal expert, a man who had chaired the independent governance oversight of FIFA's own reform process a decade earlier, who had given supporters a direct and unambiguous piece of advice: stay away from the United States, you will see it better on television anyway. And upon arrival, fans should expect that if they don't please the officials, they will be put straight on the next flight home, if they're lucky. Those words, from someone who had spent years working alongside FIFA on governance reform, landed with particular force, not because of the political content, but because of the source. This was not a fringe voice. This was a man with institutional knowledge of the governing body and its obligations, telling supporters that the environment surrounding this tournament was not safe to navigate. A British comedian, a former semi-professional footballer and lifelong supporter, went on a national radio program and said his feeling was, boycott it. He said the World Cup was a joke and a complete embarrassment. Those are not policy documents. They are the honest expressions of people in football's supporter community who looked at the situation and reacted as any reasonable person would. And then there are the 17,000. The figure of nearly 17,000 canceled tickets supporters who had committed to attending, had purchased, and then reversed that decision, represents the boycott's most concrete financial expression. These were not people who never bought. They bought, they considered, they calculated, and they decided that whatever value the World Cup experience represented was not worth the personal risk of attending. When they canceled, FIFA took a 15% fee from both the seller and the buyer on the resale. The institution that had created the conditions prompting the cancellations profited from the act of canceling. Here is the interesting part, because the fan revolt, for all the noise it generated, produced exactly 0 formal changes to the ticketing structure, the pricing model, or the access arrangements that had caused it. FIFA's public position throughout has been that demand is unprecedented, that the tournament will be a success, and that everyone is welcome. The governing body's president stated that there had been 500 million ticket requests. He used the phrase 1,000 years of World Cups to describe the scale of interest. He described the tournament as the biggest sporting event ever staged.
Those statements exist alongside hotels in Seattle, tracking 7% below last year's June occupancy. They exist alongside the Lancaster Hotel in Houston, still not sold out 3 days before the opening match. They exist alongside 350,000 unsold tickets in Dallas. They exist alongside an England warm-up match in Tampa 5 days before the tournament, played in front of 13,000 supporters in a 69,000-seat stadium. They exist alongside more than 400,000 empty seats at the Club World Cup a year ago. They exist alongside 17,000 supporters who bought tickets and then decided not to come. The pattern is not new. FIFA has a documented history of overstating ticket demand and understating attendance shortfalls. At the Women's World Cup in France in 2019, the governing body's president told media that 20 of 52 matches had sold out. FIFA then revised that number to 14. At the opening weekend of that tournament, England played Scotland in a match where almost 2/3 of the stadium was empty. FIFA had stated 16,000 tickets were sold. The official attendance was 13,188. When asked why it had implied on its own social media platforms that tickets were scarce and why the president had overstated the sold-out figures, FIFA did not respond. The questions went unanswered. That episode happened 7 years ago. The same pattern, ambitious public claims, uncomfortable reality, institutional silence when the gap between the two is questioned, has repeated itself through the 2026 cycle. And the supporters who have lived through it have responded in growing numbers and through growing channels with the only tool that ordinary people have in this relationship. They have chosen not to come. The bigger issue is what FIFA chose not to do with the time it had. The gap between the Club World Cup's attendance warning in the summer of 2025 and the 2026 World Cup's opening day in June 2026 was approximately 12 months. 12 months in which the patterns were visible, the concerns were formally raised, the legal investigations were opened, and the revolt was growing. 12 months in which the governing body could have reconsidered the dynamic pricing model that its own critics and its own legal adversaries had identified as a central driver of the problem. 12 months in which it could have addressed the seat map changes that had generated consumer complaints serious enough to prompt subpoenas. 12 months in which it could have responded to the fan organizations calling for a halt to ticket sales with something more substantive than a statement of commitment to accessibility. What changed in 12 months? The prices rose by 34% on average. The seat maps changed after tickets were sold.
60 supporters received free tickets and were asked to pay for them within 7 days. Final tickets appeared on the official resale platform at $2.3 million each, and the attorneys general of New York, New Jersey, and California began formal legal investigations. Think about what the fan revolt actually represents in the long arc of this tournament, not as a collection of angry posts or a set of disappointing hotel occupancy figures, as the expressed preference in aggregates and in specific of people who love football and who want to attend a World Cup and who concluded, through pricing, through safety calculations, through bureaucratic complexity, through institutional opacity, that this particular World Cup in this particular configuration does not represent a reasonable offer. That conclusion was reached by 174,000 people in the Netherlands, by 25,000 members of a boycott group, by 17,000 people who canceled confirmed purchases, by hotel owners in Houston and Seattle who were not sold out 3 days before the opening match, by Alan Ross of Scotland who tried and gave up and described the experience as the definition of madness. FIFA heard it all. It did not, in any meaningful operational sense, respond to it. The pricing model continued, the resale platform continued, the seat map situation continued, the institutional language about unprecedented demand and universal welcome continued, and the empty seats continued. In pre-tournament matches, in hotel rooms across 11 American host cities, in the aviation data showing Europeans choosing not to book. What happens next as the game begins is genuinely uncertain. The game itself has a well-documented capacity to override its surrounding noise. The moments that define a World Cup arrived regardless of what preceded them, and some of what the fan revolt predicted, massive empty stands, a tournament without atmosphere, may not materialize in the knockout stages, where the stakes are highest and the sense of occasion creates its own momentum. The revolt may, in the final analysis, be most visible in the group stages and most absorbed by the time the quarterfinals arrive. But that is not the test by which the fan revolt should be judged. The test is not whether the final is full, it's whether the governing body heard what ordinary supporters were telling it across 18 months of increasingly clear and documented communication, and whether it changed anything in response. On that test, the answer is plainly no. The revolt was heard in the sense that it generated coverage and concern and formal legal proceedings. It was not heard in the sense of producing the institutional change that might have addressed the underlying causes. What do you think? You've followed football long enough to know the difference between supporters who raise concerns because they want things to be better and those who simply wanted to complain. The people who signed those petitions, who canceled those tickets, who gave up on the queuing system and called it the definition of madness, do they strike you as people who wanted to miss the World Cup, or as people who were failed by an institution that had every opportunity to serve them better and chose not to?